Welcome back to the Your Project Shepherd podcast. Last week, we ended with Heather beginning to accept the possibility that she might be in over her head. With a list of things that need to be done and permits that need to be acquired, making all that happen seems close to impossible. Suddenly, she remembers seeing a sign down the road of a home designer that she follows on Instagram. Finally admitting that she can't do it all, she decides to pop into their office. After all, she already has the plans she bought on the internet, and surely they can work with those plans and get things moving in the right direction. Walking through the door and seeing the drawings and the photos on the wall, she immediately feels better. A man hops up to greet her and introduces himself as Rick, one of the designers at the firm. Heather rolls out her plans on the table, shows them to Rick, and explains the situation. Rick nods his head. He's seen this kind of mistake before. And Heather is starting to feel better. Things are going to turn around for her and Brian as Rick says that he can work with those plans. Then Rick's questions start. Have they gotten a new survey? Well, just the one from the title company at closing. Rick says no, he's going to need more information than that. A new survey is going to have topography, trees, and elevations, and that's going to cost about $1,500. Next, does she have a geotechnical report? Nope. What's that? Rick says a geotech report is a fancy name for soil testing and that the city requires it. Basically, they need someone to drill holes in the ground and analyze the soil type, and that's going to cost another $1,200. Has she checked the building setbacks to make sure her plans will fit on the lot? Has anyone reviewed the deed restrictions to make sure this type of house is even allowed in the neighborhood? Nope. As he scans the plans, Rick says he's done work in this neighborhood before, and he's pretty sure they require all the houses to have at least 51% brick, which these plans don't have. And being a corner lot, the setbacks probably won't work with this plan's dimensions. Additionally, the new maps that came out after a recent hurricane put this whole neighborhood in a floodplain, which means the house will need to be elevated about 3 feet off the ground with a crawl space foundation. These plans are for a house meant to be built on a concrete slab. Finally, Rick tells her that the HOA's architectural committee has the final say in all home designs in the neighborhood, and given the style, he doubts they're even going to approve these plans. Realizing these plans are basically useless, she asks Rick how much he would charge just to start from scratch and design something new. Rick begins running down the numbers. They charge $2 a square foot to design the new house, and based on her 3,500 square foot plans, that puts it around $7,000, plus engineering costs and other expenses like the survey and geotech report. Heather is blown away. This is a lot more than the $750 they paid for their online plans. Rick assures her this is a good rate and it's below average for what the other designers are charging in the area. Plus, once the plans are complete, he will also refer them to 3 builders so she can get free competitive bids. Later that night, Heather is talking about the ups and downs of the day with Brian, and they wonder how they could make so many bad decisions. They hope they can dig themselves out of this hole before the baby comes, but they're not sure. They're both smart people. How do they allow themselves to be taken advantage of this many times in such a short amount of time? The reality is they now own this property and the process has started. Their options are, at this point, to try to sell the house full of holes in the roof and the side, or just push forward and make it work. They're not the type of people to back away from a challenge or give up, so they decide to move forward with the design of the new house. Brian agrees with Heather that Rick's prices sound high, so the next morning he calls around to some other local architects and designers. It turns out that Rick's quote is a lot lower than the competition, so they decide to go ahead and sign his contract and move forward with Rick. So they have a first meeting with Rick's company, and it was brief but seemingly productive, and they write him a check for a 50% deposit. About 3 months go by, and they barely hear anything from Rick other than a few minor questions via email. After bugging him for updates, they finally got the news that their plans are ready, so they head over to Rick's office with fresh hope. The plans must be really good since this took so long. Rick presents them with a 4,800 square foot house that is much different than their original plans. Brian looks to Rick and says, how can you give us a house that's 1,300 square foot bigger than our original plans? We can't afford this. Rick reviews his notes and reminds them that during their first meeting, they insisted the house has to have a big game room, a media room, a study, and 5 bedrooms. And he adds there's no way that he can squeeze all that into 3,500 square feet. In fact, he's pretty proud of himself for squeezing that into 4,800 square feet. So now they're torn between getting everything they want in a house and spending more money. But they decide to accept the drawings and ask what's next. Next, Rick says, is the structural and civil engineering. I've already gotten 2 proposals from local engineers. The first one is about $7,500, and the second one's about $2,500. The difference, he says, is that the more expensive one is from a pretty well-known firm here in town that tends to over-engineer everything. A lot of builders complain that these designs drive up prices. The other company's newer, but they've been doing a lot of work for some production builders out in the suburbs. So since everything's been costing more than they originally planned on, Brian and Heather choose the cheaper option because, hey, if this company's doing a lot of work for these big national builders, they must be okay. So while they're happy to be moving forward, although at a slower pace than they planned on, they are feeling their anxiety really start to ramp up. They're now out of pocket over $30,000. They've already begun to dip into their cash reserves, and with baby number 2 on the way, they consider the very real possibility that Heather might have to stop working prior to her due date. Her first pregnancy ended with a month of bed rest, but back then, Brian's salary was enough to cover them. Plus, they weren't just bleeding money during that last pregnancy either. Hopefully, though, now that they've reached out for help, they'll start making better choices. But they've already lost a large chunk of their savings, and they have some hard decisions ahead. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Your Project Shepherd podcast. Today, we are a little more crowded than usual at the table because I have 2 guests. We have Bryson White and Garrett Delano. Say it right this time?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
good.
yeah.
I screwed it up last time. Hey, guys.
Hey.
We're going to get into the topic today about the design process, and who better to talk to about that than a couple of architects. So Bryson and Garrett have run Arc3 for, about 4 years now? Is that right?
Yep,
That's
4
right.
years in July.
All right. And so they've been in the business for about 10 years, and they actually met at the University of Houston in architecture school. Is that right?
That's
That's
correct.
right.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then you worked at another firm together for a while before you started off on your own?
Well, I worked for a big commercial firm downtown for 1 year right after school, and he went and joined a company that was at the time called Hermes. And then after that 1 year, I jumped ship and joined him, and there was a name change for that firm, and we worked together at that firm for 5 years together before starting our own company.
All right.
Yeah.
So you guys do residential design, but you also still do some commercial, right? You mentioned that you had a commercial background, so you currently do both?
Yeah, we do both. Our split right now is actually heavier on commercial than residential, but we have a really strong passion for residential, so we're actively growing that market for ourselves.
Yep, and I've seen some great projects that you guys have done, and I've consulted on some too, so they do great work. Mm-hmm. So I first met these guys about a year or so ago. I had seen some of their work on social media, and I thought it looked really fantastic, and their office is pretty close to mine here, so I decided to hit them up for coffee. And in visiting with them, I saw pretty quickly that they are doing things the right way, and I knew that we should do everything that we can to try to work together. So over the last year, as I said, we've consulted on some projects together, but we haven't built a house together yet, and I hope we get to change that pretty soon.
That's right.
So let's get into our story about Brian and Heather, our couple that we're reading about or listening about. Just a quick recap of where we're at on that. They are at that stage in life where they're having kids, they're getting ready to get out of their small little bungalow that they bought when they first got married, go to a bigger house, better schools, slide into that middle class dreams scenario.
Yeah.
And so they've been putting in their homework. They stayed up late at night looking at plans on the internet. They've, pinning stuff on Pinterest and saving stuff on Instagram, picked out a good floor plan and all the research, like the average cost to build a house, all that good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Except now they're finding out they may have made some wrong turns.
Maybe.
They bought like a for sale by owner lot in a neighborhood that flooded. Didn't know anything about that. They hired a demolition company to start tearing the house down. Got busted for not having permits. Yep. And then they found out that their internet plans aren't going to work. So they went and are talking to a house designer. So that guy designs a house, and he comes to them and with this awesome plan, and they're like, whoa, this is like way bigger than what we were expecting. It's more expensive than what we were expecting. So I'm not sure about y'all, but I'm pretty shocked at how things turned out there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm just flabbergasted.
So let's start off with an easy question here. Why shouldn't you buy house plans on the internet? Big softball question to start with, right?
Well, number one, I mean, that plan is not designed for your site. I mean, that's probably the biggest one. You have to make sure that the house actually fits with the deed restrictions or the HOA that the neighborhood may have. And so I would think that that's number one. And then the other thing is just the overall size and shape may not fit the site. Like a lot of the times we like to design a site or a house based off of its existing conditions.
Right.
And be able to maximize its efficiency based off the site and maybe take advantage of the site and its views.
Yeah, and plans on the internet just completely neglect the customization part of designing a home. And it also leaves a lot to the imagination in terms of detail. Mm-hmm. I don't know, most of those sets are just a handful of sheets, and they're not really descriptive, and they may be at the neglect of the climate. Who knows where this house was supposed to be designed. So there's a number of reasons why you should not buy plans on the internet, and those are just a few.
Is there a market for those somewhere in some world?
In the very far outreaches of the world. I mean, like in places that do not have a neighborhood or places that do not have an HOA.
So if I was building a house in the middle of Nebraska, in the middle of a field,
sure.
and I like this floor plan.
A Mediterranean style house.
Exactly. In the middle of
turrets, columns, the whole thing, right?
Yeah. But that would be a safe bet that you could technically build that. But again, it depends on the region too, because, Pier and B may not be the best plan for where
or
you're
maybe
at.
Maybe in a floodplain, but the plans are slab on grade, and you have to adjust those things. And I would also say that anybody who is not really interested in a higher level of design, I mean, knock yourselves out. I mean, it's not for everybody to go through the process of hiring an architect and a contractor that can be in sync together.
Right. Yep. And we'll talk some more about that in a minute.
Yeah.
I guess one thing that those plans have going for them is they're cheap, at least, right? I mean,
they are affordable.
They are affordable.
So I'm sure that you guys have heard that architects are expensive, right?
I have heard that. Yes. Yes. That's the word on the street.
So does it help speed the process up if they bring those plans to you? Like if somebody's like, "Hey, I got these plans on the internet. What do you think? Can you all just modify those? Does that help?"
Well, I mean, us personally, we do not work on plans that come in handed to us. So.
Right.
And that's based off of experience.
Yeah.
When we first started, we were like, yeah, sure, we'll take those on, and it actually ends up being a worse outcome and takes longer and cost us more money in order to do something like that, because you're piecemealing something that was not meant to be that way. And so at the end of the day, you end up with a plan that doesn't resemble the original plan that they fell in love with. And at the end of the day, we could have designed a plan from scratch that would have been better and more suited to their family than just buying a set of plans.
And I think just fundamentally the way that we work is we work inside out. So we start with the plan first. A lot of those plans on the internet are more focused toward reaching an exterior aesthetic first, and then forcing the plan to work.
Right.
So it's working outside in, which, trying to move one piece of it has all kinds of domino effects on both the exterior and the interior plan. And so it would slow the process down and ultimately, cost more time and energy to modify those plans than to just start something from scratch.
Yep.
Yeah. So the right way is to, find your site, right? And then gather the data first, right? Like you have to know all those things that go into, you know, what's my toolkit that I can pull from here, right?
Right.
That's right.
If you had a set of plans that let's say like the right side of the house had, or the front of the house had a large amount of glass but very little overhang, but you buy a site where that elevation is facing due west, would you really want that? No, you wouldn't.
Right.
Or if it's due south. So there's all kinds of things about a particular site that are important, site orientation, climate, context surrounding trees or neighbors or adjacent buildings. All those things play a part.
Yep. So back to the story briefly, I'll give their designer a little credit here. Once they came to him, he did kind of get them pointed in the right direction. He gathered all the information they needed, the surveys, the soil tests, the deed restrictions, all that kind of stuff, which is the first thing that you should do.
Yeah.
But aside from looking at those plans they bought and cramming all the rooms they said they wanted into the design, he didn't really listen to them, and he didn't really communicate with them. And in the end, they ended up with a house that was 1,000 square feet bigger than what they wanted and what they could afford even. And so how often during that design process should the client and the architect be talking and collaborating? Like, what does that back and forth look like for you?
Well, yeah, I would say that typically when a client comes to us and we ask them, what are you looking for in a home? How do you live in your house? I mean, a lot of those things we take that into consideration. And then when they're giving us a program list, they want an exercise room, they want a wine room, they want all these things, and you go down the list, you can only fit all that in a certain size square footage, right? And a certain size square footage also reflects the budget. And so, when they tell us what their budget is and what their square footage that they're looking for, right away we can tell, is it a realistic budget or a realistic project? And then from there, we're also designing the home, and we try and fit as much as we can, but then we have to communicate to them and say, like, look, you have a set budget and a set square footage. If you really want these items, you're going to have to increase either or.
I feel like we've gotten pretty comfortable doing that in sort of our initial fact gathering or fact finding mission that we do at the front end of a project. We have a new customer survey. We have a questionnaire that goes through all of the questions, and the first couple of questions are, what is your overall size? What is your budget? Do you have a contractor on board? And so that those first answers, really, we can get into a lot of the nitty gritty before we design a home. You don't want to go through the process first if it's not realistic. But right away, Bryson's right. We're able to say, the size, the home that you're describing in this questionnaire is not 3,000 square feet. It's 4,500 square feet, and this is what that's going to cost. So we try to have that conversation very early.
Yeah, I think people don't know what they don't know, and so like you might propose another solution that they hadn't thought of, right? And that goes back to coming to you already having a set of floor plans they found somewhere. That may work, but that may not be the best thing for their family either.
Well, and that's another thing that I've noticed on like online bought floor plans is that some of the plans are kind of maze-like. They're fitting a bunch of pieces to fit the elevation like Garrett had mentioned. But the other aspect of it is they're saying, oh, I've got a 3,000 square foot house that's got 5 bedrooms, 4 baths. But then if you really look into it, these bedrooms are like 10 by 10, or they're super small. And it's like, you realize that that's a really small house, even though it's got the bedrooms and it's checking all the boxes.
Yeah.
I mean, so like we come into it and we're considering human scale, like the way that you live this space, what is comfortable to you? Like you could do a hallway that's 3 feet, but that would feel really tight, And so a lot of these things are things that people take for granted or don't consider, and I think that
and I would also say that designing a home for yourself, it should be a very enjoyable experience, and when at the end of the day you should live in the house and it should reflect the way you actually want to live. And so it should fit custom, similar to if I were going to get a suit and I got a suit tailored for myself, it fits my measurements, right? And homes online would be accustomed to like a JCPenney suit. They're
Sure.
designed to fit the masses, and so it doesn't really. It may you can force your way in and kind of make it work, but at the end of the day, you want something that is customizable, custom to you and
Yeah.
the way you are.
And that's okay. I mean, there's a place for everything, right?
Absolutely.
Like, not everybody can or should go through that process.
Right.
Some people should, and just buy a house that's already built, or
Yep.
buy, But
Right.
for those who want to go through the process and who want something really custom, there's a right way to do it.
Right.
That's right.
And starting with the online stuff is not the right way to do it. So, your survey that you send out, talk more about that. Is that just is that asking like lifestyle questions, like how do you use the rooms, how do you want the rooms to relate to each other, or
Sure, we're
does
trying
that
to
have?
find like what are the adjacencies, the spatial relationships that are important to them. Is it important to you to have your children's bedrooms close to yours, or do you want them on the other side of the house?
Other side of the house.
Yeah, other side of the house, right? You try to find out those sorts of questions, like how do you cook? How often are you cooking? Is that a big part of your life? And how do you want to eat? How do you want to spend your downtime? Where do you watch TV? All of these things play important factors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what kind of activities do you like to do? Do you like to be outside? Do you want,
Yeah. If I get up and I like to read in the morning and drink coffee, maybe that room is better served on the east side of the house, so it's getting a really nice, warm, natural morning sunlight to fill that room with light, instead of it being on the other side of the house where it's not bright in the morning. So all of those things are things that an architect is really considering.
Mm-hmm. So during that at the very beginning, you're gathering that information with the survey and having those conversations up front. But once the design process is underway, how often are you checking in? Kind of, tell people who are listening and watching, like, what are the steps and how many meetings, generally do you have during that process?
Yeah, so I guess the first meeting actually happens after we send out the questionnaire. So we send that questionnaire out and we kind of get it, and we say, let's schedule a meeting to kind of review that questionnaire. And we go question by question, just so that we can get some elaboration that may not be written down. Because sometimes the client will say something, and we're like, what do they mean by that?
Right.
And so we like to kind of go through that questionnaire. And after that questionnaire gets done, we then have a good understanding of kind of what the client's looking for. And so we'll do a first pass at a sketch of what the floor plan will be based off of that questionnaire. And then we'll set up a meeting and kind of talk to the client about the first pass of that plan. And then we'll get feedback from them, what they like, what they dislike, and then do a revision of that plan. And then once it gets finalized, we then start to build the house in 3D. And that's where we elevate it in our computer software, where we're showing them what it actually looks like. And a lot of the stuff that we're showing them is realistic. So it kind of gives them a very good visual, because a lot of people that we find are not used to seeing a floor plan in 2D. They can't interpret, they're very visual, right? And most people are. And so it's, so we like to show them how it's actually going to look. And we find that most people are very receptive to that. If I show them a plan that's a box on on a sheet of paper, they're like, okay, I see that, but what does that mean? What does that look like? And so we're able to actually graphically show them what that's going to look like and feel. And then once that design process is finished with elevating, showing them what the interior, what the exterior is going to look like, we play with materials. We show them like, okay, this could be brick, this could be stone, and kind of really hone in on what that final design's like. Then that gets approved, and then we're ready to move into construction documents.
So overall, I would say that it's about 4 to 5 meetings typically throughout the design process, and that length of time can vary, especially depending on decision making.
Right.
I mean, it's not unusual to have a couple of passes on the sketching aspect before they really feel comfortable. We're sketching in order to keep the amount of time and energy we spend on it, less. Get the sketching done first and get that approved. So I would say overall, 4 or 5, maybe even 6 meetings
Yeah.
during the design process.
You're also getting some like inspiration photos, I assume, during that process, or some
Further
pins
into
or
the
things like that?
after the sketch.
Yeah.
After the sketch, once we get into the design, and it's more
Well-
suited to interior items. I would think.
and actually, Bryson, I would think that I would disagree with you. I mean, I think that we try to get most of that, a lot of that stuff in the survey phase.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Pinterest is definitely not a design tool, and I want to stress that it's not a design tool.
Right.
But it's also not bad to kind of benchmark things that pique your interest.
Yeah,
that's not
that's
a
right.
bad thing at all. And so we try to get some of those things before we get into sketching, because while we do work inside out and we start with the plan first, and when we're working on that plan, we do have a general idea of what that can translate to on the outside. So that's why it's important to get those an understanding of that design aesthetic first.
It can be good to use that as like, hey, show me some pictures of some exteriors that you've seen that you like. And even then, people may not know what it is that attracts them about that. Like, so
That's true.
do you like the windows here? Do you like the brick? Do you like the shape of the roof? What do you like about this?
That's true. We do get those pictures early. I mean, before we start the design process. I forgot about that.
Well, it also is an eye opener of like how educated a client is, right? I mean, we get a lot of people that say, "I really want a contemporary home," and they show us images, and you say, "Well, that's really traditional. That's not contemporary whatsoever."
Yeah.
It's modern farmhouse.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
They say they want to.
I do not like farmhouse, and they show us images, and it's like, that's a farmhouse.
Yeah, I've had a bunch of those.
Waco.
No. But I mean, we do sometimes in the design process, if we have an idea and we can't properly illustrate it to the client, we may sometimes find a image online that could help illustrate or bring that that idea to, to show them what it looks like.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that have to be taken into account, when you're first starting design, gathering that information, the site information. So, like you said, you can't always you have to start with what I want and what's my budget, but at some point that kind of transitions to, okay, what can I get instead of, you have to have some some limitations or be able to work within the limitations. So in a perfect world, like the ideal thing would be to have a team assembled before we even go to look at a property even. That's like perfect world. Like, hey, the architect and the builder are going to go jog out to the property and walk it before they even buy it. That's ideal, but that rarely happens.
Right.
Yep.
That way, like you guys or I could tell them, hey, this is possible on this property, this isn't possible before you spend your money. Okay, so aside from great design and guidance, the things we've touched on so far, what other services do you guys offer to clients that most people should take advantage of outside of design?
Yeah, that would be construction administration for us. I mean, it's one of those things that I kind of wish that we would just,
make it
require.
mandatory.
Yeah, because we have seen time and time again that it's a necessity. I mean, a client does not know what they're looking at when they go out on site. And a lot of the times, not every contractor, but some contractors let the subs run the job. A contractor, people think when they hire a general contractor, that person is the one building the home. And so they trust that person and everything. But what they really are doing is they're buying a person who has a collection or a bunch of people that they've worked with who are specializing in those areas. And so if that person doesn't understand how they work, sometimes they just rely on them to just do it. And those guys don't always have the best craft or quality assurance.
Especially if it's like a new design or a new technique they've never seen before. They're like, oh, my subs will figure it out.
Yeah, and then the subs are like, well, this is the way I've always done it. And so then you're having to go out and correct things or it may be wrong, and which causes issues.
Yeah, I mean, construction administration is that phase after permit when the house is actually being built, and I think the advantage there is that we are the advocate for the client on site. So if they don't have us involved, then it's not uncommon for them to go out and find things that are really wrong, or to not catch things that are really wrong. and have the design or the building process, go not very well,
Right.
and so they don't know what they're looking for when they go out there on site. I'm like, well, I mean, I see lumber going up, I see a slab, things must be going along fine. But if you don't have somebody out there with a trained eye, things can really go wrong really quickly. And it's definitely a worthy investment to have us on site.
Mm-hmm.
And not that we want a combative relationship with the contractor. Hopefully everybody gets along just smoothly. But there are those times where you have a contractor on board who would rather the architect not be out there as much.
Oh, totally. I think that's probably most of the time, actually.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the services that we offer with Shepherd is basically the same thing as an owner's representative, to where we're also doing phase checks and quality control walkthroughs and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more sets of eyes that you can have on it, the better outcome that you're going to have.
Absolutely.
I mean, like even good builders make mistakes. I've made mistakes. Even good architects make mistakes. Good engineers make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. It's human. It's human process.
Yep.
But the more sets of eyes you have on it, your chances of the right outcome are going to go up exponentially.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, for example, you want to tell them about...
Yeah. So one of the reasons why it's so important is we had one project where, we had a roof that it wasn't shingles, asphalt shingles. It was a concrete tile, which an asphalt shingle, I think it's like 300 pounds per square, and the concrete tile was over 1,000 pounds per square, meaning that the roof framing had to be beefier, and so it wasn't a 2x6 rafter, it was a 2x8 rafter. And we went out on site, and this was like a 12,000 square foot house, so it's a huge roof. And the framers had the entire roof framed. It looked great. We were out there. We were doing our report. We're noticing framing things like windowsill heights being wrong or headers being wrong. And so we're catching all those things to make sure that things were correctly built. And then when we get onto the second floor, we noticed that the roof was framed with 2x6 and not 2x8.
Ooh.
They framed that entire house with the wrong rafters. And we went down to the super and was like...
And that was like a 6,000 or 7,000 square foot roof, 10,000 square foot house, and then
That's
two-story.
Yeah. And so we went and told the super, who told the framers, and they were not happy. They were not happy.
I mean, I think that framer would have been content to leave it, honestly.
Yeah. And they tried every way to leave it. I mean,
Right.
they were like, could we sister 2x6s? No. Could we sister a 2x8 to a 2x6? It's like, well, then you're just wasting 2x6 lumber.
Right.
Like you could rip the roof off and use that lumber on another job. And that's what they ended up doing.
They would have either caught it much further down the road when it would have been much more expensive to fix.
The roof collapsing?
When the roofer came out there to install it and checked it. Or, they would have had a catastrophic failure.
Well, I know the roofer wouldn't have caught it, and the contractor sure didn't catch it because that contractor was one that let the subs drive the job.
Yeah.
And
but that's the advantage of having a design professional on site, because the client definitely would not have caught that.
No.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes when you stare at the same house all the time, like you stare at the same drawings all the time, you stare at the same house all the time, things kind of disappear, right?
Absolutely.
And so having... you guys come in and catch something like that is, I mean, it's huge for the homeowner. I would hope that's huge for the builder too, because that's his liability. That thing falls down. I mean, who's getting sued on that?
Right.
It's going to be the builder, not the framer.
Well, and the roof comes in.
I mean, the framer might get named.
I mean, and you would have had so much already framed, and I mean, you already started putting windows, and so that roof was like, that roof came in last too on that project. So.
And that roof was known about, I assume, all the way back during design. So it wasn't some new change they just dropped in the middle of it.
Right. I mean, the plans were engineered. I mean, the structural engineer had a full framing plan that called out 2x8 joists and rafters. So.
Yep. So aside from bad design decisions and bad real estate purchases, what are some other common mistakes that you see people making as they're coming into this custom home building process?
I think probably choosing the wrong people to be a part of the process. Taking somebody's advice a friend of a friend has a guy who is a builder, and not really understanding what goes behind. It's not the things in a house that you walk into that you see that are most important. It's the things that you don't see that are most important. And bringing the right people to the table or to the team that you can really trust is top priority. It's important to get the right architect, but it's equally, maybe even more important to get the right builder.
Yeah. And I would also add to that just unrealistic expectations on cost of things, having someone who could, say, oh, I like this style and I like this tile. I found it online. And then they find out it's not in their budget,
Right.
And having that guy, I mean, at least
it's a lot harder for somebody to have realistic expectations in today's market because price fluctuations are so crazy. I mean, ask the random person out on the street what the cost of a sheet of plywood is. They're not going to know. I don't even know that. But I think that goes back to having the right team around you. Trust is a big deal. Or finding the right professional is a big deal. But unrealistic expectations is also a big concern.
What percentage of people come to you with a good budget, like a realistic budget?
Maybe 1%.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, same here.
I mean, it's not uncommon for us to hear, I think I can do this for $125 a foot or something like that, which is...
A builder couldn't even do that at cost, I don't think.
Yeah.
Right. No.
Yeah, no. It's like, what does that include? Does it include doors? Okay. So
is this an open air concept?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. So if you're going to build a quality home, it's going to be more expensive than you anticipate, most likely.
Yeah.
So not having a contingency in place is also another mistake, thinking that they can just scrape by and just do it for the bare minimum. I mean, our experience is that the cost of a residential project goes up over time, definitely not down over time.
And when he means by that, he means over the entire life of the construction process, because as it's getting built, you see things, you're going to the site and you're seeing things and you're like, oh, but I could just spend another $5,000 and I can get this, it's a much nicer whatever. And ultimately, if they were to look back and they go, oh God, we just added $100,000 to this project.
Yeah.
Adds up.
Do you see like couples come into the process with very different ideas of what that is, both budget wise and design wise?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic to see couples that at play when they're starting to design a home, and what one person says, you can get a feel that maybe the husband's not on board, and what he says she doesn't agree with, and so we're just kind of sitting there like twiddling our thumbs in the meeting, like, well, it sounds like you guys need to really go talk about this, because we'll ask the kind of questions that we discussed earlier about just lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
And she'll say, I cook every day, and he's like, no, you don't, so those sorts of things are really interesting personal dynamics that you can discover in the design process.
We always joke about, half of our job is just playing marriage counselor.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, because they think they're on the same page, like the survey that they fill out, right? It's like usually one person's filling that survey out.
Absolutely.
And we tell people, hey, you should both fill that survey out together. But what happens is, most of the time it's one of them filling it out.
Well, actually, funny story. I feel like our most successful residential project thus far was an older couple, and she had a very strong design aesthetic, and he, did not as much. And she kind of guided that whole project, and we actually did not even meet him until the house was almost done.
Wow.
And it was the most successful one. So, husbands, just listen to your wives. Just let her design the house. No.
That's good advice. So it sounds like our couple here, Brian and Heather, they probably should never have even gone into this process because they weren't prepared, financially, mentally, any of this kind of stuff. So this is a related question that I'm asking everyone that's coming on the show. What kind of person should not go through this process? Is there a certain type of person that you see that are like, don't do this?
Someone who does not care about quality.
Yeah. Someone who does not care about quality, craft, or design. If you're not really interested in, a well-designed house, then don't try to pursue that.
And I would also say that someone who does not have patience, because it takes a lot of patience to do something like this. I mean, it takes a year to 2 years to build a house from start to finish. I mean, that's
design,
hiring that architect to finish
Right.
the day you walk into your house. Could be 2 years.
It could be too
Or more.
on construction, just on a big house.
On a big house, yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, you're going to be, joined at the hip with these people that you surround yourself with, whether it's an architect or a builder, for a long time. So if you don't have that patience, don't do it. Also, if you feel like you are smarter than everybody else at the table, don't do it. I mean, you would hire somebody as a professional for a reason, to lean on their expertise, to take their advice. If you find it very hard to take advice, then I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should start a company that just matches people up. So like you match people that don't care about quality with bad builders.
Yeah.
Yep,
You
there you
match
go.
people that do care about quality with good builders.
All you have to do is to go buy a house in the suburbs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all you have to do. And that happens
Yes.
all the time.
It does. I mean, that's the biggest thing too, is people go out to the suburbs and they're like, well, I saw this house and it said it was only, listed for like $200 or less than that. It was like $175 a foot. And it's like, yeah, but they're building a huge community, buying in bulk, and they're this terrible craft.
Well, and it's the same floor plan
And it's
1,000 times,
Exactly.
where that framer
It's getting paid by the house, and they're,
yeah.
they're just putting them out day by day.
And they can probably do it in their sleep too.
Yeah.
So,
And actually, a lot of that stuff is coming to them like pre-cut, pre-made.
Yes, yeah.
Like they're buying their lumber, it's already cut to the certain dimension.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of time savings on there as well.
yeah. I mean, I a couple of years ago was out at a very large suburban track home neighborhood, and I was riding around on a golf cart with some people, and I just stopped and I went to look at the detail, and they were using this really, really cheap sheathing, and the joints on it were not taped. And so there were all kinds of flashing moisture control issues of getting into the house. But the people that are buying those homes, they say, look at these countertops that I got. These are nice granite countertops. And it's like, yeah, it's a custom home, meaning it's customizable. You can swap a finished tile here or there, but there's nothing custom beyond that. And the quality craftsmanship is egregious. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a type of person that shouldn't go through this process. On the flip side of that, what's your dream client? Like, what kind of person should do this, and what's the best possible customer to have, other than lots of money and?
Well, we've spent a lot of time thinking about that. That is an aspect. I mean,
it is.
A good realistic budget is very important. I think somebody who's accustomed to working with design professionals, maybe they've done it before, or they really follow good craft and good design online or on Instagram or whatever. They enjoy that sort of thing.
They trust our expertise.
Mhm.
That's a big one.
Yep.
Because if they're coming to us, we expect that they are coming to us for a reason. And
Yeah,
so trust is a big one.
Design freedom. The least successful projects are the ones where they try to prescribe every little aesthetic thing about the home to us.
Yeah.
I want this kind of whatever it is. I want this style of facade.
Yeah.
But letting us do our jobs is the most successful projects.
Yeah, I think that the projects that we do get that design freedom, most of our clients are pretty I mean, they're basically like, oh wow, I didn't know that could be a possibility. It's like, yeah, you didn't, because you're used to seeing the dining room on the left, the office to the right. You come into
Right.
like
Right.
the typical suburban layout.
Mm-hmm.
So
right. I mean, if you're trying to, somebody who does not come to the table with a preconceived idea of what their home is an ideal client.
I agree.
And budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do y'all have any horror stories about projects gone horribly wrong? It could be something that you've been a part of, or just something that you've seen. Anything like that you would mind sharing with us?
Well, yeah. Aside from the things that we
Yeah, about
have
the
already-
roof.
about
Yeah.
the roof and the things that we've already talked about.
Well, and then I would say that we've had some bad experiences early on in the design process. Like, we've learned over time, like we've added the survey, we've added different things because of bad experiences in the past.
it's all about filtering out the wrong clients.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've had clients that come to us with pre-bought plans or plans that they've
Well, no,
sketched.
we had one guy that came into the office with a plan that he had drawn and
Art?
Sims.
Or, no, it was Sims.
Sims
Or,
is
yeah,
the game.
Sims. A game.
Sims. Yeah,
Yeah.
he drew the floor plan. This is kind of what I want. I mean, that to us today would have been a major red flag, and that
Mhm.
project was a disaster from the get
Yeah,
go.
I don't know how many times we redesigned it because it was kept being prescribed and it just drew it out.
Everything about it. The contractor was a personal friend, and the relationship ended when the project ended. I'm not sure if they are friends anymore. I mean, we
Yeah.
were told that it's not a.
Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't a good experience, and we learned a ton from that experience.
They
so-
also tore down the existing home on the property.
Yes, kind of sounds like the episode. that
They
you
did.
guys-
Yeah.
They did, and there was something about the floodplain, right? The next buyer, what was that?
Yeah, so
about?
that like it was in the floodway, and so
Ooh.
the existing house was in the floodway, and we could utilize some of that square footage towards the new house being in that property. If we didn't, we would have had to build up over
Wait.
it. And so, square footage wise, because the site was so big, there were certain parameters that we needed to keep the house on the lot in order to get some of that
The credit.
some of that credit.
Mhm.
Right.
But they ended up
But
demoing.
they demoed the house, and so now when they sell the property, there is no credit because the property is
Yeah.
a blank property.
And it went through almost half the site.
Ooh.
So like whoever's going to build on that site either has to go really high or they're going to have to build way in the front, and it like the proportions of the house would have been way off. Basically the first floor would have been a super small footprint. And so that goes back to also don't buying plans online and demoing your house before being told by a professional because
Right.
yeah,
there was ramifications to that.
we've also had disappointing projects where the client did not have funding secured
Mm.
before making major steps. I mean, we had somebody who demolished their house, and they weren't able to get the funding because the market was so crazy. The construction market was so crazy and expensive that the appraisers for the bank would not
Appraise the house.
appraise it because they're looking for comps in the neighborhood, and there were no for the new construction budgets, right?
Mhm. Well, the latest comp was less than half of what it was going to cost to build.
Ouch.
Yeah, and that's another big thing that we've learned that we tell clients early on is like, make sure you have the financing before you even come to us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's another big key because they're like, oh, I can easily get the financing. We're like, you don't understand. If your house does not appraise in your area that you're trying to build, you do not get that money from the bank.
Yeah, you're out of pocket on
You're
that.
out of
Yeah,
pocket
there's
that
a
amount.
gap there.
Like if they give it an appraise of 300 because the comp's in the area, but your house costs 600, you have to pull 300 out of your own pocket to make up the difference.
Right.
Yeah,
And
that's common in older neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, older neighborhoods are going to have lower comps. They're going to have less newer builds, and that's something to be aware of.
Mhm.
You know,
Another perfect client is an all cash client.
Oh yeah,
They don't have to worry about the
yeah,
financing.
financing is not an issue.
Yeah.
for sure. So that overbuilding for the neighborhood thing
Mhm.
is definitely a factor. Even if you're, if you're paying cash, whatever, right? But
Mhm.
how concerned should people be about overbuilding or underbuilding? Because we get that a lot. They're like, well, I don't want to overbuild for the neighborhood. I don't want to underbuild for the neighborhood. I mean, there's the financing component there,
Mhm.
right? But there's also like, well, is this your 2-year home
Yeah.
and you have to resell it, or is this
Yeah.
your
Well-
5-year home? Is this your 20-year home?
Well, I would. That's one of my biggest pet peeves is clients coming in and we're having design discussions and they're talking a lot about resale value, if this going back to the kind of person who should not get into this,
Mm-hmm.
if you are concerned about resale, do not build a custom home.
Yeah.
Why would you spend all that time, energy, money? You're designing a house for the next buyer. Why don't you design it for yourself? Make it customizable. If you have a quality architect and contractor on board, good craft and good design will sell in any market.
Yeah.
It will resell. You
Mhm.
don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, because we're not designing crazy things.
I mean, if you are designing, a spaceship on the property, maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, most of the homes are not that way. And if you're really concerned about resale, please, don't waste an architect's time.
Well, it's really don't waste your time or money. 'Cause
Your
You
time.
can buy,
Yeah.
there are design builders out there that,
Just go buy an off the shelf, so to
Mhm.
speak, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Spec house basically.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
So the spaceship on the property, that could be a good thing because it could be like really unique, and then you're in a magazine, and now people will want to buy that house.
well, that's true, actually. Yeah, that's true.
There's that Darth Vader house.
Yeah, the Darth Vader house
over
in Rice Village.
Yes,
Oh, man.
I know what you're
Yeah,
talking about.
very popular.
Love that house.
Has it sold? It was for sale.
I think it sold. Yeah,
I bet it probably sold. I mean, it's unique enough and it had enough notoriety that somebody would want it.
I would.
Sure.
I would totally buy that
Yeah.
if I had the cash.
Well, I was looking at the interior photos. I'm like, I don't know. Not for me, but
Maybe for
somebody
someone.
out there
Yeah.
would take it.
All right. Well, I think that's all we've got today.
Perfect.
So, Bryson and Garrett, I really appreciate you guys
Absolutely.
Mhm.
taking the time to come chat with us.
Thank you so much for the time.
Yeah. Like I said before, it's great to see you guys, young guys, doing something the right way.
Mhm.
You guys are already doing something on a level that guys 10, 20 years older from you are not achieving. So
Mhm.
Well,
it's great to see.
Thank you.
And I enjoy working with you, so I appreciate it.
yeah. Well, we're looking forward to building that first house with you, Curtis.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Let's do it soon.
Yeah, yeah.
So last thing, if people want to work with you guys, where should they go? How do
Yeah.
they find you?
Yep. Hit us up on arc3studio.com or find us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and hit us up, reach out to us, send us a message.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And thanks to you, our listeners and viewers, for tuning in to another episode of the Your Project Shepherd podcast. Here we teach that every successful project has 4 key components, and these are represented by a simple child's drawing of a house. The foundation is planning, the left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof that protects it all is proper execution. Be sure and check back next week for another episode and another chapter in Brian and Heather's story, and to hear our conversation with Matt Sneller of Sneller Custom Homes. Thanks, and see you next time.